Hello and welcome to the Mapping the Doctrine of Discovery podcast. The producers of this podcast would like to acknowledge with respect the Onondaga Nation, firekeepers of the Haudenosaunee, the indigenous peoples on whose ancestral lands Syracuse University now stands.
Thanks everyone for coming. I'm Derek Pratt, Director of Education at the Erie Canal Museum right here in Syracuse, New York. Thank you all for joining us today for reflections on Erie's waters. This is actually kind of a callback to the beginning of the Erie Canal's bicentennial 8 years ago in 2017, where we also hosted a Reflections on Erie's Water event right here, including with the two speakers I'm going to introduce in a second. We'd like to thank you all for being here today. Thank you to the Scano Great Law Peace Center and the Onondaga Historical Association for partnering with us to put this event on. And also thank you to the Winifred and DeVillo Sloan Family Fund and Central New York Arts, whose funding allowed this to happen. So the Erie Canal has been a transformative waterway in many ways, but traditionally that story has been told in an overwhelmingly positive light and from a very Eurocentric point of view. We at the museum, along with many of our partners, have been trying to expand that narrative, and this weekend was an ideal time to do that. If you are unaware, over in Onondaga Lake Park, the Erie Canal boat Seneca Chief, constructed by the Buffalo Maritime Center, is parked there for the weekend as it travels across New York, commemorating the bicentennial of the canal, replicating DeWitt Clinton's original journey 200 years ago. We felt, especially given the name of the boat, that it was incredibly important to include Haudenosaunee perspectives on this anniversary. Because, again, the canal has been transformative. There's no doubt about that. But how it transformed things are broad-reaching and far-ranging. And there's a lot of different ways you can take that. That word transformative does a lot of work. Yeah, today we are going to have a series of different speakers. I also encourage you to, between breaks, check out the museum. We have some refreshments over there. We've also set it up so if you want to go over to the lake and check out the boat, you'll have time for that. But now, on to our first talk, Sacred Waters, Trauma of the Erie Canal. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Phil Arnold, who is a professor in the Department of Religion at Syracuse University. He is the founding director of the Scano Great Law of Peace Center and president of the Indigenous Values Initiative. He'll be joined today as well by Jake Edwards. Jake is a member of the Onondaga Nation Eel Clan, and he was appointed by the Grand Council of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy to the Haudenosaunee External Relations Committee. Additionally, he is a board member of the 7th Generation Fund for Indigenous Peoples and a board member of the Indigenous Values Initiative as well.
We'll give a quick translation so that we're all of the same mind as what we gather when we gather. We start off with a gun of menu, and we start off with the Seneca Chief because it's in our waters again. And Tonawondas are close to the whole canal system as we are. And so they went first because it already had started, this celebration. In our eyes and in our hearts, it's celebration of destruction and chaos, for the peace and contentment that was intended for us to be as we walk about here on Mother Earth. And so to start off, we start with a quick translation of the Haudenosaunee. You see some very familiar faces here, which most everybody will understand. The Thanksgiving address is the words before all else. And it starts off with the people that are gathered and that were well enough to attend. And we kindly and respectfully put our minds together as one and give a gratitude to all that's here in attendance. And so we let it be that way in our minds. Then we direct our thoughts to Mother Earth. Mother Earth who carries on the responsibility, the original instructions to provide for us. Beings. When we talk about the beings, we're talking about the animal beings and the tree beings and all beings and that we know of, all of our relations as we know. We all need each other. And so the work that our Mother Earth has been summoned to provide for us is still going on. So therefore we kindly and respectfully put our minds together as one and give a great gratitude to our Mother the Earth. Still carrying on the original instructions. And so we let it be that way in our minds. And we direct our thoughts to the plants, to the medicines. We condense this kind of annual, this Thanksgiving address, in which we've been doing with these gatherings because we're all going by the clock now. We're not going by the daylight. With the number of sleeps, we go by the hours on the clock. So we condense this down because sometimes this Thanksgiving address can last into over an hour, depending on the speaker and the fine detail that they put in to all the birds' responsibilities, not only to bring us peace and we listen to them, not only to transport and deliver seeds to each communities, as they carry about their livelihood. It is up to the speaker to include these details, these fine details. Some speakers will get into the currents of the waters and how they flow and where they flow, and how it conduits itself into the life of the new leaves of the trees and the plants and the foods that we eat. But since we're on the clock here, we have to cut it short so you can just put your mind in your gratitude to the animals and the plants and the birds and the waters that are still carrying on their duties the best that they can, given the circumstances that we're all in these times. And so we let it be that way in our minds. And we direct our thoughts now to our elder brother, the sun, who without fail provides his work for us to warm our bodies, warm the earth, to help growth, warm the earth so the plants can grow, warm our bodies, bring us to daylight. And so we direct our thoughts now also to the winds that come in, the gentle breezes, transport the airflow for us, for all of us beings. And also we understand that the winds can be very strong and powerful at times, and we remind with gratitude for them to take it easy. The winds be gentle winds come through. And so we also acknowledge the thunder beings that carry the waters and the great responsibility that they have, and that they're still coming from the west. There may be a time when the thunders come from the east, and that time is letting us know when that happens that the change is about to come and that we're already prepared because we share the gratitude of what gave us at this time, at our time to walk here on Mother Earth. And so we kindly and respectfully put our minds together as one and give a great gratitude to the thunder beings who are still carrying on their duties and bringing the waters and rains, replenishing Mother Earth's energies to grow and provide for us as we walk about in peace and contentment. So we let it be that way in our minds. We direct our thoughts to the four beings who have control of our thoughts and help guide our thoughts. The four beings who remind us of what we're to be grateful for each and every day. Each and every day that we wake up and we give gratitude to the morning suns, and that we see the plant life and that we hear the birds and four messengers who are with us in our minds and in our hearts and in our bodies each and every day, help direct us to making the right decisions and steering us away from the wrong decisions. as we walk about here on Mother Earth. We let it be that way and winds. And we direct our thoughts now to the Creator who would put down and establish all of the bounties that we would need to survive in peace and contentment prior to us being here. And what he had set down here for the instructions of working and living together in peace and harmony as we walk about. And also he set down in what we see still going on today is the great love he has for the people, for the beings, for each other, and it's still going on. Well, we need to spread that a little bit wider throughout our peoples. Times are changing our thoughts and our thought patterns, and some of it is directly involved with the expansion and the people that are leaving their own homelands and not having gratitude and paying attention to the ancestors of where their original people are from. They're expanding and leaving them behind. So it's hard now in our minds and in our hearts to share what Creator has set down for us. To share love for one another and to never forget our ancestors. America was built on people looking for a freedom, right? We know that from the history books and so forth. We don't hear in the history books or even in contemporary times how many people are trying to get back home. Our ancestors are feeling that. Your ancestors are feeling that. It takes a lot to understand your roots, follow your roots, acknowledge your roots. What brought you here wasn't a Seneca chief. It was search for what we still share today as Haudenosaunee. My people are Haudenosaunee, people that belong to us. French call us Iroquois, English call us Six Nations. Other people call us other things. We know who we are. We know where our ancestors are. Development. The Erie Canal doesn't start in the 1700s. Doesn't start with Clinton. It starts far before that, 200 years before that, with the doctrine of discovery, Christian doctrine of discovery. It's devastating to the world what the Erie Canal did to our house here in Haudenosaunee. Our house, the Mother Earth is the floor, the eastern woodlands are our walls, the skies are ceiling. And with open arms and open hands and heart, we invite people to follow and seek shelter under the great tree of peace that was brought to us over 1,000 years ago. And the formation and unity of my peoples, Haudenosaunee. So when we talk about the Erie Canal and the prosperous, greatest achievement in America to grow America, it's devastating to the Haudenosaunee homelands, right through our house. Largest water dam in history. Cut our house right in the middle. Cuts off all the four-leggeds in their homelands too. Rabbits, squirrels, all these animals know their home as their home. Return to their home of their ancestors. This canal brought destruction to their homelands, to our people's homelands. It was a plan, it was a destiny, manifest destiny. People in search of themselves and not looking at their own home. We develop and grow. Well, our people open up our hands and our hearts and our home to these people. In our minds, back in that day when we met, we felt that they were in search of peace, and that they had followed the white roots of peace of the great tree peace that was planted right here on Onondaga Lake. So we accepted and shared. One of the first things we share with them is the Thanksgiving. Not the one that happens in November, one that's publicized as America's Thanksgiving Day. The Thanksgiving, for lack of a better translation to English, is our bodies connecting to all that's provided for us. Live, be at peace and contentment, and to acknowledge it, like we're to acknowledge our ancestors and where our roots come from, and to share with them Thanksgiving address, which is the fundamental rules, laws. Those are kind of words that short change the meaning of life, rules and laws. The original teachings that was taught, shared with us, came in the bundle that the Sky Woman brought, destination of developing the world we know of today. Sky Woman, she's referred to as, get into the depths of it, and she had a destination, she had a responsibility, and she carried that out. And in that bundle that she brought with her, along with leaders of the food source that kept us all around in good health, is the three sisters, the corn, the beans, and the squash, and the tobacco for communication, which we still all use today. So when we talk about these people that are looking for peace and freedom, as it said, and left their ancestral lands in search, what they brought with them, devastating, the peace of Turtle Island. Now, as beings, yes, we have our differences here and there. There is diplomatic ways to resolve it, which is part of the fundamental original instructions of harmony. So along with this canal, so they start talking about this canal, and now when we talk about our history as beings and the original instructions, we can stay on that for days on end, because it affects each and every one of us today. The instructions of yesterday, fundamentally. When we fail to acknowledge them, we become lost. Become lost in many, many ways. Put things in front of you, put things first that shouldn't be. Because one of the fundamental rules, if you want to call them, if I'm looking for another term for English of original instructions, is that the decisions that you make today as individuals, as leaders, as just beings, you're in a governmental position and you're governing people, and the decisions that you make today are to no way negatively affect 7 generations coming. It's our responsibility to look out for 7 generations coming. It's our turn here. And our decisions are crucial for the generations. The face is yet to come. we talk about sky beams, like I say, we cut short the Haudenosaunee, we talk about the responsibilities of Grandmother Moon. She has the great responsibility of the water currents and the water flows. All of them. The sacredness of water, we're reminded of. The sacredness of the water that each and every one of us were in for 9 months prior to even taking a breath. It's our Grandmother Moon, it's her responsibility. Flows of the currents, it's her responsibility. So we acknowledge that. And so when we see these people come to our lands, come into our house, hungry, weak. Some records, history records don't tell it all. We're only hungry and weak and struggling to survive. They're all half gassed too. Brought with them, some of their biggest supplies they brought with them is alcohol, rum. It was supposed to soothe them. We all know the effects of Haudenosaunee. Right? Haudenosaunee is it changes your mind. That's the name we gave when we met alcohol. Haudenosaunee. It changes your mind. You guys to make good decisions for future generations under the influence, devastating as we see today. Devastating to what's our responsibility to provide for future generations when we make those kind of decisions. So as we met these people, now we're skipping a whole century of discussions with these people, these newcomers. Because we're here to talk about the canal. So when you look at it, the canal, prior to the canal was the land. You got these laws that they came over with, doctrine of Christian discovery. When the ship landed Turtle Island, they had a doctrine with them stating that any lands that they find uninhibited by Christians, there's no Christians there, then they have the rights to it. Bill can get into more detail of that, and it's something that really has to be looked into to pass on the truth. The generations coming so that we don't keep making the same mistake. You know what they say about them making the same mistake over and over again and again? There's a definition for that. We'll get into that. And so when they start understanding our response to this Haudenosaunee, after all the bloodshed and so forth that went on, how they want to do it on the legal, make it look legal. So what these people do that were in charge of making decisions for the newcomers in Albany, Schenectady, it's called Schenectady. On the other side of the pines, Schenectady, where the decision making was going on with the Continental Congress and when we get into the history of it, we had to share with them who we are. We have to keep going back to it to catch on. So in this discussion, much time we got here, but this is who we are. To the east, the Mohawk Nation. Moving further is the Oneida Nation. Canandaigua is the Onondaga Nation, where the tree of peace is planted right here on the shores of Onondaga Lake. Couple hills over the Cayuga Nation and the Seneca Nation. Now, if we get into the understanding of the great law of peace in which we unite as one heart, one body, one mind. This could take 8-10 days to explain it. And then we have to translate it. To give you a just and a rundown quick, because we're on the clock, each one has a fire. Each nation has a fire. Just like each one of us in here has our fire, right? And that's our heart. And it's our responsibility to protect that fire. That fire goes out, we all know about that. So it's our responsibility for our time here to protect our own fire. So that you can have help reach out to the ones who need it. That's that unity part of it. It's in here. It's all in this law. Law is a short James Kirk interpretation of it in English. And this is what we would call the Haudenosaunee, great law of peace, lack of better translation. It's all of what was given to us. It was all of what we feel. And it was all of how we help each other. And we shared this because the people were weak and hungry, half-gassed, that we didn't understand. But what we did understand is they're like us. They got 5 fingers, they got ears, they got eyebrows, same features, just look a little different. And but what we did know is that they need help. Because they're following the roots of peace. It's what we thought. But what we've learned was there was no peace and friendship on those ships coming over. And so once they got established and they put their foundation work in, their shelters built, we start arguing amongst each other. Well, what to follow? Religion-wise, especially religion. Religion is supposed to be the word of peace and love and happiness. It's one of the most life-taking arguments in the world. Is Christianity. That's what came over too. I was one of the first invasive species. It was Christianity. So getting to the Erie Canal as they're making up paperwork to say they got legal right to the land. There was a case, it wasn't too long ago, 1926, the Supreme Court case in Rochester, because Massachusetts and New York were still arguing over who owns the land in Rochester. Massachusetts, if you remember in the history books, plain all the way over to the Pacific Ocean. And on paper said they were right. It all belongs to Massachusetts. That decision was made in some bar room, saloon, gin mill, whatever they call them, gathering spots. And they said that they can rightfully take the land away from the native inhabitants legally. They can take the land if we leave them 10 rods around the village. 10 yards, 10 rods. I don't know how long a rod is, but it doesn't sound like too much. And they left us, they can rightfully claim the rest, in which they did, and start building laws over it. So anyways, jumping a little bit further, we came up with an agreement with them when we first met. This is 100 years after they landed here with their diseases. Many different diseases. Alcoholism is a disease too, right? Brought that, they legalized it. Legalized disease, alcoholism. Put up Virginia, get all the young people over there, take their money. A lot of lessons that have to be learned. Now they're legalizing the other. Dignity, they got Haudenosaunee. Dignity is 2. They got Haudenosaunee is what? Mind changers. Changes your mind. Now you can go and smoke some poison weed legally. Like alcohol. And you wonder why people aren't doing things out there, why they don't work, why they don't have gardens anymore. They're all following that same thing that wanted this canal built so that they can progress, develop progress, industries that Anheuser-Busch, like that. They already got all you guys' money, now they're going after your kids and your grandkids. They're not showing just them big Clydesdale anymore, they're showing them cute little colts pushing kegs around. That's their catch. The younger minds to that name, to that brand. Keep making these same mistakes. Getting programmed by the programmers. On TV, in multimedia, whatever you call that. This one here. Programming for children. You get this agreement. I don't know how much time I got. I don't want to take all Phil's time up either. He's got a lot of knowledge to share. But when you're talking about the newcomers and we notice that they're going to stay, we come up with an agreement. This was with the Dutch traders, the industry again. We found them on the shores of the Mohawk community. We were in this area. And so each nation, each one of our 5 nations, this was established over 1,000 years ago. And I keep going back because it's information that you're not going to find in the history books. These are oral teachings passed down, and it's repetitive. You hear it now, you might hear it next week, next month, you hear it again and again. Like they're going to hang you. Every gathering, large or small, ceremonial, socials, meetings. You hear that Thanksgiving over and over again. It's repetitive oral teachings. Oral teachings. We're reminded over and over again. And before you can go and talk, you have to have clear mind. In English, they call it a good head, good mind, good thoughts, good head. You have a good head, you got a bad head, you can't put this out there. If you have a selfish head, you can't put this out there. Because part of the planting of the tree of peace here was to stop argument, warfare, and they buried the weapons of war underneath the great white pine so that future generations won't see that, what we've learned from. And that's why I'm saying that when you keep doing it and you're not learning from it, there's a definition to that. So we saw our weapons of war be buried under the tree of peace. Weapons of war are greed, jealousy, dishonesty. Those are what starts wars. That's what starts the war. You know? Disrespect to one another. Those are weapons of war. Those are to be buried. Seen that happen. We share that over and over again. And so we shared with these newcomers the fundamental laws of living in our house. Eastern woodlands. Now we have agreements and understandings all around us. The English call us the Six Nation because the Tuscarora Nation is also seeking shelter. And way down south, this message of peace and unity expands, and you can follow it as far as the pine tree grows, the great white pine tree grows. And when you go back to the Haudenosaunee, the Thanksgiving address, we talk about each one has a leader, right? All the berries have a leader. Strawberries, the leader. Red willow, the leader of the medicines. Maple trees, the leader of the forest, leader of the trees. So as far as what you call the sugar maple, it's good medicine. Good medicine comes in. As far as that grows, as far as the white pine grow, they're about the same distance from here. This is part of our message. So when you look at the written history, there's Six Nations Iroquois Confederacy. Or when you listen to the oral teachings, there's hundreds of nations that came under this. Weren't written down because that's prehistoric. We're prehistoric. According to the education system in America, we're prehistoric. So what occurred, who joined our confederacy wasn't written down, so it don't count. Only count 6 of us because that's when they start writing it down. 1613, we met with the Dutch. We came up with this agreement. It's called Caswenta. It's a 2-row. Prior to that, it's explained in here about the fire. So each nation has their own fire, right? Like I was saying earlier, I didn't get to the ending of it. There never is an ending. We're growing. That's why these on the end here don't stop. It's if another nation was to seek shelter and follow the white roots of peace, there's room to add to the rafters of our longhouse, expand the house, which we did many, many times. Now with these newcomers here, we came up with this agreement of living because they stayed here longer than they stayed here too long. But when we noticed they weren't leaving, we had to come up with an agreement with them. And so we came up with this agreement. We're beginning, there's no end again. But as you begin, we talk about the one row is one boat that they came in all their religions and their laws and their ways of life are in that boat, in that vessel. And the other row represents our canoe. In all our ways, in our songs, dance, ceremonies, and so forth, are in that canoe. And we agreed that we would not interfere with each other's ways, but we would agree also that we would travel the river of life side by each. For as long as the sun shines from the east and sets in the west, for as long as water flows downhill, and for as long as the grass grows green, that this agreement will be in effect. And that's our way of forever friendship, peace, friendship, forever. That's what we agreed to. Once we noticed that they weren't leaving. And this came about because as they were trapping and gathering and getting right in their country, supplies that they found here, trade supplies. So when it comes to the law here, the Mohawks have their council of chiefs, the Oneidas, the Onondagas, the Senecas all have their own council of chiefs. And so anything that is of their matters will stay within their council. Anything that is just outside maybe affects the Oneidas, in which the Dutch and the fur trade and all that started affecting. It was all happening in Mohawk country for a number of years. And a lot of winters had passed. Then the Oneidas started noticing them coming in. And that's when it happened. That agreement had to be made because now whatever affects the Mohawks, that's their business. But once it affects one other, it's all of our business. So that's why we came up with this Two Row agreement. And so as we talk, now we can get into the great law of peace, but right now we're supposed to be here on the Erie Canal. The Erie Canal, after the government, because you have to understand the formation of the United States. We shared with them exactly how to conduct diplomacy to the guy in Canandaigua, how to establish a governance, because in the history book, in the archives, it's not in the history books in schools, but in the archives, the notes in legislature, the governing bodies of the colonies were discussing how can 5 savage nations live so far apart from each other, yet be governed under one government. So they said, we have to find out. So they came and asked us here at Onondaga. They asked us how it works. And so again, we shared with them the laws. Living in our house. The diplomacy. There's a lot of fine details we won't be able to get into today. But what we did was help them establish what today known as the Constitution of the United States. In that Constitution, but I got questions about that myself today. What happens if you violate the Constitution? What happens? Nothing, right? You're on your own. Somebody might not like you anymore. You're in violation of the Constitution. Constitution is supposed to be the fundamental laws of your government. But there's no disciplinary action for violating it. Honor system, yes. Well, we have some. This could be considered a constitution. It already has been considered the first draft of the American Constitution. There was a congressional act in 1988 to recognize Haudenosaunee contributions to the Constitution of the United States. Well, the peacemaker brought this message to us, and we weren't getting along very well with each other. It was bloodstreams on the ground. So without getting into all the fine detail that the oral teaching tells us, when we come together, we accepted this message of peace. One example that the peacemaker expressed to us is one arrow from each nation. Your arrow is your livelihood, it's your defense, it's your food source. Take one arrow and it can be broken in half, just like that, snapped in half. Take one arrow from each nation and bind it together with all the procedures, protocols, ceremonies, Thanksgiving addresses, responsibilities, and the law of this one, Canandaigua. And you bind it with the sinew, the leader of the four-legged, the sinew of the deer. You bind them 5 arrows together with all the laws, original teachings, ceremonies, and you bind them tightly, and no man can break that bundle. That bundle is right together, unified as one. One body of arrows. We share this with these newcomers. And just to give a brief history, again, that's not in the history books, but it's in the archives. Some of our friends that like to read found out that the colonies, the 13 colonies, used to call themselves the 13 Councils of Fire. Following this, each council has their own fire. The 13 colonies used to call themselves the 13 Councils of Fire. And so when we gather as 5 nations, in which we had to do in order to come up with this, great importance, we had a Grand Council. Oops. Grand Council. Now this, we're supposed to be talking about water. So if you want to get back to the Erie Canal, you got to first learn the history of the water itself, which was a good reminder there. And so when I was talking about the 13 Councils of Fire and what they took from us, our advice to them, and I think it was in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, a meeting with the Continental Congress or representatives or whoever it was. This is when they told us that we're going to take your advice. We're going to build government like yours. And so they asked us again to come to Albany, Schenectady, and share with them again. So we did. And they formed this. And so anyways, jumping ahead another little bit, I gotta get to this one here because this is part of the Erie Canal. This is George Washington. George Washington was a land speculator, as were many of his close, his team, his brothers. He had brothers that were land speculators all around the Haudenosaunee, all around us in Kentucky, Ohio, and all throughout. People are buying land off of Massachusetts as individuals. So the Dutch developed this Holland Land Company, Dutch investors. They start buying up land. But the Erie Canal was successful in part because of the Dutch, the Holland Land Company that was buying land off of Massachusetts. And so in turn, the Holland Land Company donated, or somehow, probably not donated, but it was 100,000 acres that were turned over to the canals to help build the canal, right through Seneca, like where Tonawanda was talking about, all through the villages. Direct violation of United States word, peace and friendship. In the Canandaigua Treaty, which is George Washington commissioned Timothy Pickering. Timothy Pickering was commissioned to treat with the Haudenosaunee for peace and friendship. And what's that word? Perpetuity. 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 I guess that means forever, right? I like the grass growing green and the water flowing downhill and the sun shining from the east better than that word. It's hard. And so, but that's where it comes from. That's where the foundation of it comes from, forever, peace and friendship. So this represents 13 councils of fire, and the arms are locked, signifying their unity, what they learned from here. And then they asked us for peace. There's 13 of them, but there's also 14, 15. So you got the keepers of the eastern door, the Mohawk Nation, and the keepers of the western doors, the Seneca Nation. And you got their longhouse in the middle, but you also have a double house. You got the longhouse and the capital of the United States as one. This is what this belt is telling you here. You got two houses here, one fire. That we would work together, that we won't have to go to war if we stay at peace. This is our argument in the 70s and so forth with the draft, that we can't be drafted into your war because we stayed out of another war. War over land. There's a lot of history there's a lot to say about that war over land. So the Erie Canal happened in violation of this treaty. The treaty was 1794. George Washington signed it. George Washington tried to eliminate us 20 years prior to that, or less, 15 years. Sullivan campaign, Clinton, we heard of Clinton's name earlier, Tonawanda. This is all stemming from the doctrine of discovery, and they found that what they took from us was useful, beneficial, but they didn't take it all. He took how to make the government work, three-bodied government. They understood the concept of our house. And that's the government standard, everything's for the government. What they left out was one of the main things in governance is the women. Women choose the leaders in Haudenosaunee for a very good reason. Women are closest to Mother Earth, closest to the children. They watch the children grow. They understand if that's going to be a good leader or not. Because you got to remember now, we got to go all the way back to the beginning, Turtle Island, to understand the connection and responsibility of a mother. From Sky Woman, as she's dancing across and spreading the soil to grow Turtle Island, what it is. Erie Canal, keep going off on this, there's so much, like I said, that you're not gonna be eating. But because we're on the clock, you got the Erie Canal guy looking at me. Erie Canal. Whitman's ditch, they call it, brought with them. Which, when they did, not gonna get into all the campaigning of it and all. But George Washington visited this area. And he's coming across and he's standing on a drumlin, him and Moses DeWitt. Moses is his name? Well, he's surveyor. Surveyor, anyways. And he's standing on a drumlin here on Idle Lake, and he looks across. He says, "This is where I'm going to build my empire. I'm going to build my empire." And there was one problem: we were in the way. We became New York State's Indian problem, and I still think we're considered that today. It's New York State's Indian problem. You can get rid of us like they planned to. And so he said that this is where he's going to build his empire, copying the Roman Empire, maybe copying some kind of empire. But that's why they say today, that's why it's on New York State license plate, the Empire State. That was the plan, build the empire here. Well, when they decided to build that canal because of the wars, there was wars going on with their brothers. Brothers are fighting brothers, right? Britain and English. Same families, same people, same boat, different colored coat. But they kept changing colors. And so they're convincing the people that they needed to spend their money to build this canal for expansion. For not only for war supplies, but to expand industry. And so when they were doing that, they had a bunch of, after the war of, you see, who was it? The British, they were fighting. British had hired a whole bunch of mercenaries from Germany. Paid them to come and fight for the British. I guess America beat them out. Kept them captive and then used them to build the canal. Some of them Germans, some of them Irish. And the influx of immigrants, which came to a halt, this administration, started way back then. So in New York City, they're bringing all these people from all over the world. And then at the same time, they're talking about they need workers to build this, so they brought in a whole bunch of them. Disease-infected people coming through what is now known as the Erie Canal. The settlers are moving into towns, just taking over in violation forever. Undisturbed promises of George Washington that this land will not be taken from us. So when you look at the Constitution and you violate the Constitution, what do you go to? Who do you complain to? The violator? So we did. 1794 was this treaty in November 11th. December 1794, letters were sent to George Washington. 1795, letters were sent to George Washington. Your people are violating your treaty. His response was, it's true he has a few bad boys, or whatever he called them, bad boys, and that he can't control all his people. Well, if he can put together a couple thousand bad men to go and destroy our crops, he could have put together a couple guys to go talk to these bad guys and tell them to get off of that land. It's not America. That didn't happen because he had another plan, going back to the doctrine of discovery. Went back to the doctrine of this is all their land. We have no right to own it. We only have right of occupancy, according to Marshall, Tom Marshall. So what I'm getting at is the destruction and the devastation that the Erie Canal had caused, bringing in the boatloads of smallpox and malaria, many more. As they got to the lakes of Lake Ontario, what their destination was, opened up the Great Lakes to all these settlers, and along with them bringing in all these diseases. So once they learned that those smallpox was killing off our people, along with the alcohol, the rum, and the whiskeys, and this trade, a lot of this stuff isn't reported because it doesn't look good on the funders. It doesn't look good on the tourists to get on the canal and travel to the Great Lakes. But a lot of these boats were denied even to port in these newly established, I don't like calling them settlements, because who did they settle with? Settlement is that means you agree, right? We'll settle. All these newcomers, colonizers, in the history books, they call them settlements. You know, all these new settlements came across. But who did they settle with? Indigenous people look at the land as not for sale. You can't sell your mother. And so when they were first making these, according to the United States government, messages and notes of the presidents, it stated in there that Congress appropriated money to help New York State pay for its quasi-treaties. Quasi-treaties. Because they knew that New York State couldn't make treaties. Only the United States can. Another federal law that they violated, but then they turned a blind eye to it because of the industrial move. So when you look at the Erie Canal, it was devastating to America in more ways than just to the Native Americans, the indigenous populations. You brought in more invasive species, and it's still going on today through the same channels or waterways. Unregulated. Well, you guys, I can go on for days on this stuff. Because we haven't even got into the smaller details of this agreement of the Canandaigua. We got a little bit touched in on the violations of it, violated it right away. You look across, the Erie Canal violated the Fort Stanwix Treaty. A nation is only as good as its word. Nation of the United States, in our eyes, is only as good as its word, so it's no good in our eyes. Contamination, not to put it personal to you guys, it's your government. You guys are the other side of the treaty. Treaty can't happen with just Haudenosaunee. They had a treaty back in New York State and Massachusetts made a treaty. Treaty of Hartford. And in that treaty, it was about the Pequot. Between New York State and Massachusetts, you know, there was 3 different treaties called Hartford. The first one was Pequot Wars. You heard about that in the history books a little bit, without detail. History. Not necessarily how it happened, not necessarily what happened, but that's his story. And so the Treaty of Hartford was where they outlawed the word Pequot. And they outlawed Pequot owning land. And they outlawed Pequot language to be spoken in any manner. Treaty. Today, we hear about devastations, but you don't hear of a remedy. We'll rally your brains a little bit and come to a close with, let's find a strategy so that we can all live side by each in peace and friendship forever. Down I go.
Do you need help catching up on today's topic? Or do you want to learn more about the resources mentioned? If so, please check our website at podcast.doctrineofdiscovery.org for more information. And if you like this episode, review it on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And now, back to the conversation.
Well, I have a number of slides. I like PowerPoint, but it gives me a kind of rough idea of what I want to say and how I want to say it. But Jake filled in most of the broad strokes of what I want to talk about. I want to thank Derek and Steph mostly for putting them together. Thanks to the Sloan Foundation for supporting this event. Thanks to Lisa, who was here just now, but Lisa and Ronnie and all the folks here at the Scano Center. It's nice to see Dan and Gail here because I'm talking about the doctrine of discovery way back when we started this discovery group with my wife, Sandy Bigtree. So this is a real honor to be here at this time. So I want to start with this image because this is another image by Brandon Lazort, who also did the artwork walls here at the Scano Center. This is another rendering of the Peacemaker coming across the Onondaga Lake in the white stone canoe. And what I like about this image is that all of these, as part of the story, is that these sort of deterrents were thrown up in his way of bringing the great peace to the Haudenosaunee. And so that's represented by these waves and stormy conditions of the Peacemaker. You can say it's another craft in Onondaga Lake, which represents another completely different story that I think we have to pay more attention to these days. Oh. Yes, this one? Yep. Yeah, great. So, just making, Jake's point again, I'd like to show this image to my students at Syracuse University because, we live in what we could call a sacred geography that's always connected to water in a variety of different waterways. So the peacemaker journeys all through this area. And then finally, it's established here at Onondaga Lake as the Great Peace. So many things I want to talk to you about, but as the founding director of the Scano Center, we made some decisions which had to do with dealing with the French fort, which is out back. It's closed now in perpetuity. So the French fort celebrated this less than 20 months, the coming of the Jesuits into Onondaga Nation territory, between, 1656 and 58. And I want to talk a little bit about that. The French colonial government granted them Onondaga Nation territory in a land grant, which I'll talk about in a minute. And that's an example of the doctrine of Christian discovery that I want to talk about. The French fort, the reproduction of the French fort is originally built in 33. It's iconic here in Syracuse. A lot of people come back to see the fort. And then St. Marie in the 70s, really it expanded in the 90s, becomes a living museum. They have reenactors and things like that in the French fort. And in 2011, it closes and we decide, well, working with Onondaga Historical Association, we create a collaborative to represent the Onondaga Nation story, the Haudenosaunee story here at the Scano Center, right? So we've flipped the narrative, flipped the script here at Onondaga Lake. We're really quite pleased and proud of that fact, and trying to bring the presence of the Onondaga Nation back to Onondaga Lake, because we are on unceded nation territory, right? The county claims to own it, but given Jake's narrative, you can understand why this is a contentious thing. We opened in 2015, so we've been open 10 years. I'm no longer directly involved. We've got Joey Hill, and just on Joey. Emerson Shenandoah is now the director here at the Scano Center. So this is the collaborative. It was a wide-ranging collaborative. It was both academics and the county, Onondaga Historical Association, etc., and then the Onondaga Nation. So that the nature of that collaborative was pretty complicated to sort of keep together. And thankfully, it kind of ruined our health, quite frankly. And now I'm happy to pass it off. But this is the Two Row Wampum that Jake was referring to. He told you the story of the agreement, which is important. But for us, it was quite a working document, right? It was a way that we try to work together. It doesn't always work out, but we try to collaborate around this. Now, I talk a lot about collaboration because it's difficult to pull off oftentimes. It's for academics, you're never in charge of your own material, which drives academics crazy, frankly. So it's a very different way of working, and I've tried to bring that into Syracuse University. All right, so the interactions of the Haudenosaunee extend over an enormous geographical area, from Nova Scotia to the the watershed of the Mississippi River through the Ohio Valley, through the Great Lakes, and south into what's now Georgia. Jake referred to it as the extent of where the great white pine grows. And that's sort of the geographical extent. I grew up in Michigan. Sandy and I go to a little place here in the lower peninsula, like there. And there are Haudenosaunee names of streets up there in Michigan. So we know that the extent of the influence was very powerful and referred to as kind of under the wing of the Haudenosaunee. We cover a lot of ground here at the Scano Center. I hope that you'll come back or you'll have some time today to really visit the different units or the different stations of the Scano Center to learn more about this. But in the final room, we talk about how it inspired Western democracy. That's what Jake was talking about, the women's movement and the cross, among other things. So 3 ways that Onondaga Lake is culturally important, culturally distinct. The founding of the Great Law of Peace. Dating this has been a tricky business, but it's largely agreed that it's well before 909, Common Era. Contact with Jesuit missionaries, which I'll talk about in a minute, and then also a central stop on the Erie Canal, which we're all talking about today, right? So you can see from the Haudenosaunee perspective why this looks like a dam, a water dam right through their territory. Okay, so one of the things that I would like for us to be aware of as we go through the sort of the triumphal history of the Seneca Chief and the Erie Canal is that it wasn't the only boat in 200 years ago that was sailing along the Erie Canal. And the Erie Canal folks, Derek in particular, knows more about this than I do. But I just want to mention that there was also a boat called Noah's Ark that sailed along with the Seneca Chief. Because I'm in religion, I pay attention to these kind of references. And according to the New York Times, recent New York Times article, Noah's Ark actually carried members, 2 Seneca boys of the Haudenosaunee, called them tribe. They shared the vessel with eagles, deer, and bear as part of a dehumanizing sideshow. Not my words, that's the New York Times. So what's going on here? I'm asking, I really don't know, but this is a very interesting kind of framing of the Erie Canal opening up the Wild West or something, right? So what's happening in the minds or the imaginations of these people that are involved in celebrating this achievement? Also, another Seneca nation, not the Tonawanda Seneca, fashioned what they call the wampum belt, commemorating the Seneca chief. Okay, and you can imagine that there's quite a difference of opinion of how this would be a kind of celebratory act, in terms of commemorating the canal. That's another discussion I think we need to have, although I'm just putting it out. Right. So this is an old book now called Conspiracy of Interests, Iroquois Dispossession and the Rise of New York State by Larry Hoffman. It's already a kind of old book, but Larry talks quite a lot about the Erie Canal and how it was specifically involved with the dispossession of the Haudenosaunee, very specifically. That was the intention of the canal, and these kinds of frameworks then, like Noah's Ark, were intentionally there to destroy the Haudenosaunee. We talked about Simon DeWitt. He was a New York State Board of Canal Commissioners, New York State Surveyor, 1784 to the 1830s. He also worked with or for the Holland Land Company, cousin of the governor, and he was invested in flipping lands. This is a real textbook case of nepotism and conflicts of interest that were all about the canal. Now, in Larry's book, he cites this, and I'd like for you to look at Erie in particular, right? So according to the demographics of the time in the 1800s, according to this map, there is nobody living in Erie at the time. So who counts as people, right? And who doesn't, right? In the history of the canal. And then in Erie, by 1855, there's, 132,000 people. Now, Larry Halpin claims that this was intentionally to dispossess the Haudenosaunee, to move white people essentially into their territories. And that was the whole intention, particularly around Buffalo. All right. Now I want to talk about something else because it hasn't been mentioned. We went in early meetings with people who are commemorating the Erie Canal. They said they weren't going to talk about religion. Now I felt like that, was a personal diss on me because the Erie Canal is so important for American religion, right? And it still reverberates today. So many different religions are, well, we could say pop out of the canal various ways, right? Of course, Mormons or Latter-day Saints in Palmyra. I talked to this, we talked to people coming from foreign countries about the Mormons getting their start here. They said, we're a long way from Salt Lake. Yes, we are. But, Palmyra is the place where Joseph Smith receives the revelations from those golden plates, right? Millerites, right? Around Albany area. These are the people that were convinced the end of the world. And the end of the world kind of theology or apocalyptic thinking is what kind of defines American religion in so many ways. Of course, and I think it was around 1843, something like that, that they predicted the end of the world was going to happen. It didn't. Just so you know, and then, but this kind of morphs into Seventh-day Adventists, Jehovah's Witness, other traditions that are still very much alive and with us today. I think a couple of weeks ago, people were predicting the end of the world too. So it's not something that people have given up on. Now, why this is an important framework for religious imagination around the Erie Canal is an interesting question. What does the Erie Canal have to do with the end of the world? Shakers, the Fox sisters, of course, the spiritualists. Steph has a nice picture of them in her office. The Shakers, Oneida community, these kind of strange utopian experiments with, complicated marriage and things like that. I'm claiming that these are all responding to some kind of traumatic conditions that I think Jake was alluding to, frankly, all right? These traumatic conditions of many, many different languages, of different people, different heritages, jammed together in, frankly, what would be seen as the middle of nowhere. And somehow making a meaningful life away from home, So, or I could put it this way, people don't create religions if everything's great, right? They make religion when things are dramatically wrong and threatening and scary, right? So I think that the canal needs to be investigated more. It's been referred to as the burned over district because of the religious fervor through the canal zone, but I think it needs to be thought through a little more. And there are some students that I'm working with that are interested in this.
Excuse me,
Yeah,
I'm not familiar with the burned over district relationship to the conflict part.
it's really just the canal zone. The burned
So
over.
it's like
district.
Bible Belt in the north?
Yeah, I mean, it's all during the 19th century. There are these different religions that come into being right along the canal zone. Yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah. So they refer to it as burned over districts, kind of like associated with what's called the Second Great Awakening in American religious history. So kind of the Bible Belt, but they're making up their own Bibles in a way, okay? And so, and it just comes out of these kind of fiery imaginations that I think are fascinating. By the way, this is our religion department. We would go take these pilgrimages and go to the, they no longer have the Hill Cumorah pageant, but we went to those several times, and students and our family were just amazed.
It came out of this sweatshirt.
Right, yeah. Yeah, scorched earth. So my own family, so Sandy and I are also investigating something else that Jake was talking about, as how we can investigate our own lineage and how we're connected to these historical realities, right? And I found some very interesting and important, this is the book we're writing. I can talk a lot more on this, but I'll just mention this. So, you know, Daniel Arnold's Revolutionary War veteran, I suspect might have been involved in the Sullivan-Clinton campaign, but he was a surveyor in 1811, well before the canal, in what's now just west of Rochester, right? It's called Ogden. And my third great grandfather, Aaron Arnold, this is his tombstone, ran a still along the Erie Canal, and that was his livelihood for until he died in like 1860, right? So again, going back and referencing what Jake is talking about, it's an odd kind of genealogy I'm doing. I'm interested in kind of these terrible stories of my family. And then the second great grandfather, Henry S., who is the genealogist in the family, he goes west along the canal and then dies in Michigan, right? This is an example of manifest destiny right along the canal. And then you have to ask yourself, well, why am I doing this then? You know, why am I back here thinking about this, right? So these kind of, it's a way of doing genealogy that's a little more connected to the colonial frameworks that we currently live in, right? All right, so lots of Arnolds. We were just at an Arnold house yesterday in Rhode Island. Right? So we go all the way back, referencing the Pequot Massacre, or what's called the Pequot Wars, and the first John Arnold background. So lots of things to think about. This is Aaron Arnold's home in Ogden. It's now the Historical Society and Museum. And we had a very interesting day talking to the person there. Anyway, that's enough of that. Okay, so at Scano, we focus on values, and I wanted to talk about that. So we have 6 stations now associated with the values that we're trying to impart. I won't talk about those, but one of the things that we emphasize upstairs is the Great Law of Peace. And I hope, like I said, you can visit that. Wampum and condolence here in this corner. And then I want to touch on doctrine of discovery, European contact. So this is the Jesuit land grant from 1656. We had it translated. There's an image of it up here. And essentially it gives the Company of Jesus, or the Jesuits, 600 square miles of Onondaga Nation territory even before they arrived. So this is an example of how any discoverer entering the lands of non-Christian people, those lands are automatically deeded to the sponsoring nation, the church, and as well as their bodies and all worldly possessions. There's lots more here to talk about, but the Haudenosaunee have a wampum belt that tells a very different story of this contact between the Jesuits and the Onondaga Nation. This is called the Remembrance Belt. I won't read it because I don't have much time, but so there are quite starkly different accounts of that encounter from 1656. Columbus Circle, we know about that, and the doctrine of Christian discovery. So Columbus is representative of that. And the succession of Catholic popes justify slave trade and the conquest of the various parts of Africa initially, and then the Americas, based on a kind of crusading notion of Christianity. So what I'm doing in my classes now is making the connection between this legacy, 1492, and Christian nationalism today. So it all is connected by the Erie Canal in some ways. So this is a quote Jake was referring to. The verses 1452, when they're raiding West Africa, invade, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens and pagans, to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery and take away all their possessions and property. And then the Borgia Pope says something very similar in 1493, all justified by Christianity. That's what we're going back to. Cabot Charter, the British and Henry VII get into the act. Sandy and I actually saw this document, the Cabot Charter, in the last few years. Okay? And that's all brought into US property law in 1823, just before the opening of the canal. I wonder about that coincidence, Joe, and how those two things are connected. So John Marshall brings this doctrine of discovery language into US property law, and that continues today. You know, first-year law students will learn about the doctrine of discovery in their property law class. All right. And then, of course, Oneida v. Sherrill, which people should really talk about here. And the first citation of the Sherrill case from 2005 is trying to uphold the doctrine of discovery in the face of Oneida attempts to repurchase their lands. All right. Now, since 2009, there have been a number of repudiations of the doctrine of discovery. Christian groups, religious groups repudiating the doctrine of discovery. We're also working with those people, right? I can't get into that, but all right. I think I will skip over this. All right, well, it's going to play anyway. So this would have been Onondaga Lake before it is industrialized. So with Rachel May, you know, our current senator, we worked together on an NEH grant to try to piece together what Onondaga Lake would have looked like previous to industrialization in the 18th century, previous to the Erie Canal. So it was this kind of wildly diverse territory that people would have utilized in a variety of ways, right? Cedar swamp, all kinds of springs as well. And then, of course, the salt sheds from the 1860s. Right? This would have been the salt production right around where we have what's Manifest Destiny Mall. There's yeah, that's Jake's one. Sorry, I stole that. Yeah, there it is there. This is a few years ago when we were just taking drone footage, and then you see it all there. All right. So We talked about Sullivan Clinton campaign and how that becomes the predecessor of the Erie Canal. So let me finish up with this slide, that we need to find a way, and I'll say this in a different way than Jake did, but we need to find a way that moves away from the colonizing stories of the Erie Canal, from the doctrine of Christian discovery, in order to embrace an indigenous story of our creation as Americans that came out of this lake. And I hope that the Scano Center and others that were involved in restorative healing, maybe that can be a consequence of bringing more attention to the history of the Erie Canal. And I'll end it there. Thank you.
The producers of this podcast were Adam DJ Brett and Jordan Lawn Cologne. Our intro and outro is social dancing music by Oris Edwards and Regis Cook. This podcast is funded in collaboration with the Henry Luce Foundation, Syracuse University, and Hendricks Chapel, and the Indigenous Values Initiative. If you like this episode, please check out our website and make sure to subscribe.